Hey, it's Willie Crawford here, coming at you with another Facebook Live. Today is Thursday, September 19th, and I've decided today to make my topic, the truth about success and failure and all those things. And so I want to examine a few issues that, in the back of your mind, they have to be, in your thought process, but for some reason, a lot of people don't seem to want to face up to them. So I thought I'd just throw it out there. I really have no idea where today's conversation is going to take us, but I think that, given that part of what I do online is I teach people to start their own businesses, um, and I'm a role model, if you will, that it's part of my job to help people to face up to reality, to know the truth, and to have realistic expectations. And I did a Facebook Live not too long ago where I talked about being realistic and having realistic expectations, setting realistic goals. And there I taught uh, people in the theme of Paul Lindbergh's book, Be Unreasonable. I taught people to have unrealistic expectations or unrealistic demands on themselves. To make demands of themselves that the average person wouldn't do, and also to expect more from other people. So, I'm sort of straddling two worlds there. I am waiting for a few people to join us. I need to grab a drink of water. Today, I'm going to take examples from my own life, from the lives of many others that I've studied, many others that I know, and I'm going to hopefully nudge some of you out of your comfort zone. That's part of my purpose today, is to get you moving in the right direction, because so many of you have unrealistic expectations. You don't actually know who to believe or what to believe. And so I want to use my own story to an extent, but to nudge you in the right direction. And I I have in the past said you can't multitask. I actually have like three or four things going on at once right now. But you can't multitask. What you do is you jump rapidly between tasks. And so for the next 20, 30 minutes, I will focus on our conversation here. I'm still waiting on a few people to join us. I don't see anyone yet, but I'm sure they'll be here in a minute. And I'm sure actually that there are people that I just don't see yet. And so I'm going to go ahead and get started, actually. Let's see. Why don't I begin with my story? I wrote a book back in 2000. That was a cookbook, and that started my online success. What happened was I came online in 96, and I looked around, and like many people, I thought, how do I make money on the internet? And somebody said, you find a group of people that you bond with, that you connect with, and you find out what they want and you share it with them. I thought, well, what do I have to share with people? And I thought, well, there's got to be people out there who grew up in the same environment I did, who missed the cooking I grew up with. So I put up a website that was nothing but recipes, and from that website, I started publishing on mailing lists. I was told to build a list, and this is way back in '96, mind you. And I started sharing recipes on this mailing list. And people started liking my recipes, which were often recipes sent in by other list members. And they, at some point around 1999, they asked me, Willie, do you have a cookbook? And I said, no, but if you'll buy one, I'll write it. Let me adjust my computer slightly. And they said, okay, we'll buy it. And from that, I wrote a simple cookbook, and lo and behold, people started buying it. But before I'd even published the first, before I'd even printed the first copy, I had like 100 orders. And so I actually printed the first 100, 200 copies on a printer I bought off of eBay, a used printer, and went down to a local copy shop and had them do some color covers to go on the outside to the comb binder, and bound my own books. And after I had sold about a couple hundred, I had enough money to go to a local printer and have them print up some professionally. And that's how I launched my business. And from that, uh, I was out on the internet marketing discussion board talking about using marketing tactics to sell a cookbook. And people noticed me and they started discussing marketing theory with me, if you will. And from that, I became an internet marketing expert. I was invited to speak at a seminar in 2002, December of '02, and I didn't even have slides. I had notes on index cards, and I stood up front, really nervous, and bam, I was an internet marketing guru, you know. And so people come from the strangest backgrounds. I went on to go through professional speaker training and to do all kinds of things. Um, and I ran into lots of people over the years who I discovered, you know, that we don't know the full story on. At my first seminar, I sat around late at night in my friend Ramon Williamson's hotel room, and John Reese was there. For those, he was the first internet marketer, first person in the internet marketing space to make $1 million in a day, and he did it in 18 hours. But the reality is that he spent about 3 or 4 years traveling around to seminars and conferences making friends. So when he released his product, all he had to do was reach out to his friends and say, "Hey, I've got this $1,000 product. Can I get you promoted? I'll send you a copy." You know, and we looked at it and we promoted it. And John made $1 million in 18 hours, $1 million in sales in 18 hours, and he became internet marketing history. Um, when John and I were sitting around Ramon's room in December of '02, John said something that was an aha moment for me. He said, "You know," he said, when somebody is making $20,000 a year, it's difficult for them to imagine making 50. They're making 50, they can sort of imagine making 100. They're making 100, they can sort of imagine making 200. They're making 200, they maybe imagine making 500, and he just stepped it up. Okay? And that was an aha moment for me because I realized that in order to see possibilities, you have to be around people who are doing what you want to do, and you have to see proof that that's possible. Because without that proof, you don't know what to believe, really. And so I made a habit from that point forward of hanging out with some very, very successful people. And what I discovered was um, most of them were just ordinary people who had all kinds of flaws, and yet they, whatever reason, stepped out of their comfort zone and they moved up in the world. And I'll give you, well, let me find my notes again. I'll give you a few examples of many of my heroes, if you will, and I don't really have any heroes, but these were people who were at one time homeless. They were broken individuals. Many were addicted. Many were relatively hopeless. Some were uh, homicidal or suicidal. They were depressed, and yet they all picked themselves up. You know, I look at the first billionaire that I ever bonded with. He was an alcoholic. I knew because as I read his writings, I could pick up language that indicated he was. And because I had an alcohol addiction at the time, I don't now. I'm one of the lucky 4 or 5% who are sent through a treatment program and successfully break that addiction. 95% don't actually, so it's pretty sad, and it's true of any addiction. Um, but I could tell from his words that he had an alcohol addiction, and so I sent him an email and I asked him a couple of questions, and we bonded, and he sort of pulled me into his world, and I started learning from a billionaire who has since passed away. Uh, but I look at many, many, many of my heroes, and I see struggles they faced, and I see that what they did really was they hit a point where they just said, "Okay, I'm fed up with the existence that I have," and they said, "I am going to bite the bullet and do whatever it takes." And you know, I spent a lot of time on the seminar circuit, got to know lots and lots and lots of very famous speakers, and I got to know their story from behind the scene, well, not behind the scene. I got to know their full story because they often shared it. Okay? And I'm going to give you just a few examples, but what I'm going to encourage you to do is to make a habit of studying successful people. Okay, so you can spend all day watching the media and feeding on the negativity, but if you, I personally spend more time over on YouTube watching videos of successful people, listen to what they have to say, and I read a lot of biographies of very successful people. Again, tuning in to what it is that they have to teach me. And I'm just going to throw a few examples at you. Actually, I don't see today's Facebook Live as going very long for a number of reasons. But I look at my heroes, people that I got to know early on in my speaking career and my internet marketing career. Uh, One of those people was Ted Ciuba. He did something that several others did. I think it was Ted. He decided he was going to create an information product, and at the time, um, he didn't have one. And I'm pretty sure it was him that posted that he had an information product for sale. And then when the orders started coming in, sat down at his typewriter and wrote the information product, because I think he wrote it over like a Thanksgiving holiday. It was him or somebody else maybe. But see, he backed himself into a corner that he had to get out of. And for a lot of people, that's what we have to do. We have to make a decision and then take massive action in the face of what is seemingly insurmountable odds. Um, monument take on monumental tasks, and that is what it takes for many of us to go from where we are to massive success. I'm going to just throw out a few examples of people that are famous today, or one time were famous, but at one time, they were in the gutter. I look at my friend Stephen Pierce, who spoke at my first seminar in Pensacola, Florida, and Stephen, he was one time homeless and washing up in public restrooms, and he went from there to where he had his own private bus and toured the country and gave speeches, and then got to speak at large corporations and things. He moved up in the world, but he started out very humble beginnings. I look at Joe Vitale. Joe drives a very expensive car, and I think at one time he was charging people like some obscene amount of money just to ride around in his Rolls. Uh, Joe at one time was homeless, and he was a ditch digger, and now he's known for his role in the movie The Secret, and he's known, teaching the law of attraction and all those things, and he's a multimillionaire now. But he struggled at one time, you see. I look at Dan Kennedy, who's known affectionately as the Millionaire Maker. Dan has gone through a lot of ups and downs, and he talked about one time when he was in the manufacturing business, and he was at a point where his suppliers cut him off critical supplies he needed in order to keep stuff that people were buying from him, and he was down to like his last $5,000 or whatever, and he couldn't meet payroll, and he had no money, and he took what little money he had and scraped it together and bought a ticket and traveled out to his supplier's office, the decision maker's office, and camped out on the front door of this guy's office. So the guy showed up, and I think he said he had 2 cups of coffee. He handed the guy a cup of coffee, and they basically went in and they talked. And he just said, okay, you can shut me down, but you do that, we're both going to lose. So what can we work out? See, he faced an obstacle, and he worked it out and turned his business around, that business around. One of my heroes in the internet marketing space is Jimmy D. Brown. Jimmy talked about, growing up and once living in a house with dirt floors, and he's like sleeping on the floor and looking at there's rats crawling around and things like that. He went from that to being a very successful and famous internet marketer. I personally grew up on a farm in North Carolina where At around age 9, my grandmother bought me a 22 rifle with my money. And I'd grab my rifle and a box of bullets, and I'd go out after school and travel through the swamps and the forest behind my house, hunting for rabbits and squirrels. And I'd shoot them and take them home. My grandmother would cook them. And we always had a garden, and we grew all of our own vegetables, or neighbors gave us some of theirs. But it was a very, very meager existence. Almost all the furniture in my house, all the furniture in my house, a lot of the clothing that I and my two younger brothers wore were what we call secondhand. They were hand-me-downs. The wealthier people, when they didn't need them anymore, they took them to this store in Fairmont, North Carolina. It's on Center Street, I think it was. And this guy would buy used junk from the better off people, clothing, furniture, whatever. And the poor people, the really broke people, would go into town and buy this stuff. And so I, as even in high school, wore clothing that was secondhand clothing. It was hand-me-downs that were often threadbare. I can remember sitting in a classroom and looking down at my pants, and they were so threadbare that the crotch had ripped. The threads were that weak. And so, it's like my underwear were exposed. Luckily, I was wearing underwear that day. And, it was like I looked around me and I saw a lot of other kids with threadbare clothing. It was just the community we grew up in. And I had to pull myself from that up to where I am today. And for me, a key was books. See, when I was growing up on the farm, now I see people are joining me. I see China Smith White has joined me, Paul Guyon, Joe Orlando, Gary. I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name because I'll mess it up. Bosun, Steve, Lisa Young, China again. It's good to have all you guys join me. I wanted today's session really to be, Wigno Edwards. I want the session to be about acknowledging that the people that you look at as heroes and you look up to, that most of them went through tremendous struggles at some point in their lives. And what you're looking at now when you see somebody on social media is them after all those struggles. I've been in business online for 23 years. Before that, I spent 20 years in the military. Well, actually, 6 years before retiring from the military, I started my online business. So you're seeing the culmination of a lifetime of experiences. You see, but what you don't see is the ups and downs. And that's what you don't see with a lot of people. And so what I wanted just to encourage you to do was, I want you to get in the habit of reading biographies. I read a lot. This is a book I just finished reading. It's called $1,000 and an Idea. It's by Sam Wiley, who's he had $1,000 and he went to billionaire status. Sam created Bonanza Steakhouse, the chain. He created Maverick Capital, Michael's Stores, which is a craft store. Actually bought it. University Computing, that competed directly against IBM and Microsoft at one point. Sterling Software, Green Mountain Energy. He built businesses in all these niches, and yet he started out with $1,000. And in his biography, he shares a lot of really neat stuff about the ups and downs and being on the verge of, bankruptcy at times. And then from there, sitting around butting heads with Ross Perot or Bill Gates or whatever, very, very inspirational. So that's what I feed my mind. And that's what I encourage you to feed your mind, because then you see that, when you go on the internet and you read somebody's sales page, the first thing I want you to do is I want you to spend more time reading the small print that you do the sales page. You got this big headline that says you too can make $1,000 a day doing this or whatever. And then very small print. Actually, it shouldn't be in the small print because the law says it needs to be in about the same size print, but it's down at the bottom. It says results aren't typical. Of course, they're not typical. And they're required by law to put that on the page, but you don't focus on it. You focus on that headline that says you too can make $1 trillion. Well, it's possible. It's possible, but it takes making decisions. It also takes being willing to do things that most people aren't willing to do. You see, the reason us entrepreneurs earn an above average income is because we're willing to take above average risk. Risk and reward are directly proportionate to each other. The more risk you take, the greater the potential reward. Also, the greater potential for you to fall flat on your face and people say, "See, I told you. You know, who did you think you were?" You know. So I spend a lot of time, and I encourage you to spend a lot of time studying successful people. You know, I go out on YouTube and I watch videos. I on my timeline, I share a lot of videos of different people. Lately, I've shared like David Goggins, who is known as the world's toughest man right now. Uh, David had severe learning disabilities. I mean, he barely made it through grade school. He was dyslexic. He was a lot of things. He in high school, after high school, he gained so much weight. He went from like 180 pounds up to around 300. And then one day he's watching television and he sees Navy SEAL training. And this guy at 300 pounds decided he wanted to be a SEAL. And he made it through Navy SEAL training, believe it or not. But he got pushed back in class twice. He went through Hell Week 3 times. And yet he became a SEAL, and then he went through the Army Special Forces training. Then he went through Air Force TAC-P training. So he is pretty tough. I think he did like 3,000 pull-ups nonstop. He's run 200 miles nonstop. So and I encourage you to go out on YouTube and watch this guy because he's extraordinary. I look at people like Les Brown. Les had tremendous learning disabilities. He was labeled, you know, in grade school as educationally, I forget what the term was, but it's like, you know, he was labeled retarded, for lack of a more politically correct word. And he viewed himself as, you know, I'm not as smart as all the other kids. I'm not as smart as my brothers and sisters. And he had a teacher that basically said, I don't want to hear you ever say that again. And that teacher showed faith in him. He pulled himself up. So he has a very inspirational story. And I love listening to his videos, his recordings on YouTube. See, that's what I feed my mind. Lisa Nichols, I mentioned recently on my timeline. Lisa lived in South Central LA. She was broke. Her husband was in prison. She had a young child, a son, and she said, my son's not going to get involved in gangs. He's not going to get involved in all this stuff on my watch. And she went from being a mother on welfare, on government subsistence, to scraping together enough money, putting money in banks, setting it aside. And now she's like one of the world's most sought after inspirational speakers. I posted a link to her on my timeline. I shared some videos from her because I looked at her and, you know, she's a young Black lady. I don't know how old she is, but you look at her, she's got this sort of funky hairdo. And I'm like, what's up with that? And then as I read her story, she talked about when she was like really, really broke. She didn't have enough money to get her hair done. She decided, you know, I don't need all this fancy stuff in my life. So she started putting money aside, actually in the bank, and she stopped having her hair done, and she stopped having a lot of other things. And so now you see her on a lot of videos, and you see her being interviewed on shows that interview millionaires, and she still got that funky hairdo. But I remember looking at her and thinking, I like her. And Lisa, hopefully I'll get to meet next week because I'm going to an event in New York City where she is a nominee for an award, and hopefully she'll be there. And I hope she wins the award in that category. But when I first looked at her, I go, I like her. See, she went from welfare and struggling, and that's the thing that you don't see about most of these people is they're just ordinary people. You know, when I see somebody in the internet marketing space, for example, who says, you know, I didn't start out at the top. I pulled myself up. Not only that, I had to make a decision. That decision was, I'm going to do what it takes. And, you know, when I look at what it took, just to become a professional speaker, I bumped into a guy named John Childers who said, you need to go to my speaker training. And he said, he called it his $30,000 speaker training. And I went to a hotel near Nashville and went through his training. He didn't charge you $30,000 up front. He charged you $5,000 up front and said, you'll pay me the rest from your increase in earnings using what I taught you in the training. And he put us in this really fancy hotel called the Gaylord Hotel. Hotel was so big it had water fountains and walkways where you it's like walking between mountains, and you had birds actually flying around the hotel. There's a radio station in the hotel. It was that huge. And John said, the reason I host these events at this hotel is I want you to get used to living this lifestyle. I want you to see what it's going to be like once you're successful. And, and at that time, my wife and I loved the hotel, but we weren't anywhere near at the point where we even felt comfortable spending that money. I fall back and I look at people that are famous now in the internet marketing space. I look at Jeff Walker. First time I met Jeff Walker was at a seminar 2003-ish, and his wife had given him a hard time because he spent, I don't know how much money it was, a little bit of money, to attend Joel Christopher's Master List Builder workshop. And his wife's like, we can't afford this. And now Jeff has had like a dozen, I think it is, consecutive launches of product launch formula and derivatives, and each of them is done in the millions of dollars. You see, it takes a leap of faith sometimes. It takes saying, I'm going to make this happen. But when you say that to yourself, and I see my buddy David Kavanaugh, who's a fellow speaker, and he's hosting seminars over in Asia, probably in Thailand right now, but I've seen him in Singapore and places like that too. And we've shared the stage a number of places, including Malaysia and Singapore and all over the US, I'm pretty sure. But thanks for joining me, David. It takes acknowledging yourself, first of all, that if you want to do extraordinary things, you have to put forth extraordinary effort. See, I wasn't even sure where I was going with this, except to tell you it's unrealistic to look at a guru and say, make me a guru. You've got to acknowledge to yourself that it's going to take work on your part. See, you don't like hearing others work. I several times wrote in my newsletter, don't ask me to lie to you and tell you that it's easy, because it's possible, it's doable, but it's going to take work on your part. Yeah, if you have the money and you want to pay someone else to do it, you can buy a done-for-you product. But most people who don't have the money, they're like, well, teach me how to pull myself up by the bootstraps without any money. Well, if you don't have the money, then you put in the time and the effort to do what it takes to make it happen, okay? So, read the small print on the sales page where it says results aren't typical. They're not typical. The people that you see on stage, the people that you see with making hundreds of thousands of dollars, some of them, I know one person who's making over $1 million a week, and yet this person started out, at nothing. It takes extraordinary effort, and luck does play in there some. Luck does play in there some, because it's timing. Two people can try the same thing, and one person can fall flat on their face, and another person can do extremely well. It's timing. I've watched people try to roll out products, and the product not take off, and then I watched 6 months later somebody roll out a very similar product, and it take off. It was timing. The market was ready for it. So if you try something and it doesn't work, fall back, evaluate. Ask yourself, does the market really want what I'm trying to offer them, first of all? If it doesn't want it right then, maybe your timing's wrong, or maybe that they will never want it. You have to be able to be adult enough to face up to those realities, And but I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up soon. It all boils down to making a very simple decision, and that is a decision that you're going to do what it takes to make it, okay? And then you have to say, well, it may not be easy, but I'm going to do it anyway. So you have to decide you're going to fly with eagles. And to do that, you have to figure out where the eagles are, then you suit up and you show up. And I've done that numerous times in my career. I shared it. I used to hang out with a group called the Winner's Circle. I've got an award in the background that they gave me. That group was mostly multimillionaires, and some were extremely wealthy. And I looked at that group and said, I want to hang around those guys. And I started doing that. And their thought processes rubbed off on me. But I had to bring something to the game. And what I brought to the game was the fact that I was a connector. So I could connect them with a lot of other people. So I had something to offer them. I didn't have wealth at the time. What I had was a skill that they needed, and that was to connect them with deals that they wanted. So I still had to offer them something. You can't expect something for nothing, but you do have to decide, I'm going to do what it takes. And you have to acknowledge that sometimes that what it takes is a monumental effort. Okay. And if you're ready for that, then you can do anything. You can do anything that you want. My friend, the late Jim Straw, he wrote in his book, and he used to say all the time, anything that anyone else has ever done, anything that any other human being has ever done, I can do too. Okay? And he's also taught that there are no secrets. There are only things I haven't yet discovered. He was sort of he was a member of Mensa. What can I say? The guy was a brilliant guy in the top like 2% of people who've been tested for intelligence in the world. And yet he was depressed, actually. He was depressed because his wife had passed away and he kept to himself. And the reason I became friends with him is I noticed and I invited him to come out to seminars where I was speaking when I was in the vicinity of Atlanta. And so I dragged him out, and this multimillionaire who was at home most of the time, depressed, came out and we became friends. And he taught me a lot of things, taught me a lot of things. And that's what it takes. So it takes looking at the people that you want to be like and saying, I'm going to hang out with them. And with that, I'm going to end by issuing you a challenge because it's a call to action. The call to action is I want most of you actually, to, well, I know I have people join me from as far away as Africa. Actually, Africa is not such a long flight. I've flown to Nigeria not too long ago, and that was actually a fairly short flight. I was surprised. But I'm going to invite you to look at this event here. What did I do? I messed up the URL. This is the event I'm going to be at next week. Actually, a week from now, Thursday it starts. And some of those people I mentioned to you have been invited. They've been nominated for awards at this event. Now you look at this event and you're going to go, wow, there are multimillionaire celebrities who have, I think there's one billionaire, but I know there's one billionaire in the crowd, but there's lots of millionaires. And you look at those people and you go, they're above my pay grade, to use a military term. Well, they're not. They're not. They're just ordinary people who started out and did what it took. So I want you to look at this event, and I want some of you to go ahead and register for it, And when you show up there, I want to meet with you. So once you register for it, and I gave you a link. When you go check out that link, you'll discover the event's not free. Few things in life are free. You either pay for them with money or you pay for them with your time, but you pay for most things. And a lot of people go, I don't have the money. Okay, then be prepared to put in the time. And then they go, I don't know how to do that. Okay, set aside the time to learn to do that. You either got to pay somebody who knows how to do it, or you have to learn how to do it. Very few things in life are free. You want to be a doctor because you look at the money that doctors make, you have to go to medical school. I can't afford medical school, okay? You can maybe get a scholarship or something if you're an outstanding student, but the odds are you just can't get into medical school. You can't be a doctor. But here's the secret. I talked to my doctors, and the last time I went to see my doc, I looked at him and I said, you don't show up at work tomorrow or next week, you don't get paid. I said, you're working for money. I said, you're a slave who has to trade your time for dollars. And the minute you stop working, you don't get any money. And he said, you're right. He said, what do you do? I explained what I did. And I said, I get paid if I don't even show up for work. And he's like, I want to know how you do what you did. So my doctor is envious of me because I get paid whether I show up for work or not. He doesn't, you see? So it's all about how you look at life. I thank you guys for joining me. I hope you gained something from tuning into this. It was more of a pep talk. but it was also more of a reality check. It was saying all these people that you see who come across as mega successes, most of them had their ups and downs. And if you read their biographies, if you read their bios on their websites, and you study them, you'll see they didn't start out at the top. They struggled, a lot of them. And a lot of them had their downs, and ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs. And what happens though is when you have a lot of ups and downs, people will forget about the downs, the failures, if you have enough successes. These successes overshadow the failures. So they go, wow, look at him. Look at President Donald Trump. He filed bankruptcy. He had projects that crashed on him, but people don't remember those so much as saying he's the president of the most powerful country in the world, and he's, controlling his empire worth billions and all that, you know. Uh, but see, people forget that he had bankruptcies. He crashed major real estate projects. People remember your successes. Your successes need to overshadow your failures, but it takes making a decision. The decision is, I'm going to do whatever it takes, and you have to say it's not always going to be easy. Don't convince yourself. Don't try to convince yourself it's going to be easy. Say it's possible. It's possible, but it's not possible if you don't try. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. I hope you found value in this. I hope you share this on your timeline. I tried to be totally transparent with you today and share with you, yeah, I've had my ups and downs, in my biography, which you can get on Amazon.com now. I have just a few copies in my office, but I decided to stop mailing them from my home office. And so it's called Get, G-I-T, it's improper English, Get Off the Porch. Again, it's available on Amazon.com. Not only is it available in English, it's available in Spanish. I speak Spanish, but I didn't translate it because my Spanish is not that good. It's just that I acknowledge that Spanish is the second most spoken language in the U.S., and so I should publish my book in Spanish too. With that, thank you for joining me. I will hopefully see you tomorrow at around 11 o'clock Eastern. Thanks, Paul, for saying great information, inspirational. I was hoping to be inspirational, but also to just set realistic expectations and encourage people to get off the porch, get off their butts and do something and acknowledge that it's going to take effort, but that effort is what's going to put you where you want to be. So go for it. Thank you. See you later.